This is on the engine oil handout we got here. And what is viscosity? Anybody can tell me what viscosity is?
The thickness of the oil.
Yeah, the ability to flow at a given temperature is the proper answer to that question. Okay, so which of these two oils that you see on these API service things, see that? All right, look at those, study those for a second. All right, which of those two oils is suitable for use in a diesel engine?
1040.
What are you looking at?
What?
What are you looking at?
Example 2.
So I'm seeing API service SN, API service SN. I see SN, SM, SL, SJ. I don't see any compression fired oils there at all, do you? There would be C.
15 police for diesels.
Well, no, the important part is the two letters.
Oh, really?
If it says S, it's spark fired. It's got to say C for compression fired.
Oh, okay.
If you're looking at something like CF4 or something like that, basically, so you better have a C. See where it says API service? If it doesn't have a C there instead of an S, then you don't use it in a diesel. Now you can, in some cases, use diesel oil on gas burners, but you can't go the other way. ILSAC is an acronym. It's not really an acronym. It's an abbreviation. It's got to spell a word to be an acronym, but it's an abbreviation. It stands for what? Anybody know what that means? Anybody, could anybody say that? International Lubricant Standardization and Approval Committee. Burn that in, remember it. If I ask you out there in the shop one day, you should be able to tell me. International Lubricant Standardization and Approval Committee. All right, Saunders, get busy. You got 646 worksheets. All right. Yeah, not really that many, just 645 actually. Number 4, what is a service category? It certifies the oil's ability to pass specific lab tests that measure the oil's ability to perform in an engine. The questions I'm asking you here, most people can't answer. So make sure that you remember this stuff. And there is a handout available that I can shoot you on this thing in PDF. It certifies the oil's ability to pass specific lab tests to measure the oil's ability to perform in an engine. I always used to go to Keller's Flea Market in Savannah, Georgia sometimes when I go over there. And one day there was an engine that they had up on the stand. It was a little 4-cylinder engine, little Iron Duke, and they cranked that thing up. It was just hooked up with a starter on it, and it was on a little stand where you could fire it up, similar to what these out here does. So while it was running, they were advertising some Teflon additive or something. They drained the oil out of it while it was running. Listen to what I'm saying now. They drained the oil out while it was running. They took the oil pan off.
While it was running?
While it was running. They took the side cover off. They took the valve cover off. And it ran all day with no oil. Now it did have a coolant system and a radiator and all that. But that Teflon stuff made that metal so slippery that it didn't require any lubrication.
Huh.
Clean that. Okay.
So if you don't mind, could you repeat number 4 again, because it's very long and you talk quick, and I'm not a camera, so I can't.
Pass the lab test to measure ability to perform in vehicle.
The oil's ability to pass specific lab tests that measure the oil's ability to perform in an engine. Okay, what is API? What does API stand for? What do you think the A stands for, y'all?
Automotive.
Nope. American. We're talking about oil, so P would be petroleum, and the I is typically going to be
industry.
Institute, not industry. Close though. All right. Number 6. What does SAE stand for?
Well, look at this.
What do you think the A stands for?
Standard American.
American. Well, what is S?
It's not standard?
Society of American Engineers.
I had the last word.
Oh, I'm sure. All right, number 7. Who are the SAE and what is their goal? They're working in different companies in all areas of transportation, not just automotive. The goal is to create a standard language and definitions to ensure a particular thread pitch, oil viscosity, or diagnostic trouble code will be the same all over the world. Now, as a matter of fact, if you look at your OBD2 scan tool data, the code and the definition for engine coolant temperature sensor, if the sensor fails, it's typically supposed to be the same whether you're plugged into a Honda or a Chevrolet or a Dodge or anything else. If it's the OBD2 now, they can actually, but now the abbreviation is going to be called that. Now there's been some hullabaloo going on about, you know how some people call an alternator and some of them call it a generator?
Yeah.
You know, I wonder what the difference is of that. I mean, I've actually had people go back and forth. Well, yes and no, but I wrote an article one time for Vistion, and Vistion rebuilds alternators, and they make instrument clusters and electronics, and they make ignition coils and starters and just all kinds of cool stuff. And I wrote an article for the 13th issue of Motor Age that year, and I wrote one about alternators, and I was calling it, you know, generators and all this stuff. And the guys from Vistion called me up after they read the draft of my article, because it was basically pushing some of their products. And they says, we're calling it an alternator. And I said, well, the OBD2 people, you know, J1930 regulation, said that we're supposed to call it a generator. And they said, we don't care. We're calling it an alternator. But then I came up later, I said, well, if it's got an internal regulator, if the voltage is regulated at the alternator, then I would call it an alternator, but if it's controlled by the PCM, I'd call it a generator. That was just an idea that I had or something I read somewhere, but then I had people dispute that. And so there was a big hullabaloo that went on about that kind of thing. Suit yourself, basically. But you're gonna, if you see generator, then just think alternator, you know, like over there. Okay, let's see, what does the group API represent? What do they actually do?
They represent fuel.
Oil marketers is who they represent. They create industry standards that define equipment, practices, and products. Everybody got that? And we got two more questions on this little shorty. Number 9, engine oil must do 4 things. Tell me what it's got to do.
Lubricate.
Lubricate's a good answer. What else? Come up with it, somebody. You guys are smart. Come on.
Not burn. Not burn out.
Pressure.
Well, I don't know if you can prevent that. That's engine parts. Carries heat away. I guess you could probably distort that into not burn, couldn't you, Melissa? Act as hydraulic fluid for lifters, tensioners, and actuators. Seal the rings to the pistons and cylinder walls. That's pretty much the 4 things it needs to do. And when SAE 10W30 oil is cold, it will flow like 10, we say 10 weight, but actually the W stands for winter. Everybody remember that? When you say 10W40, the W stands for winter. But anyway, the W, and like 30 weight oil when it's hot. Does this mean multi-grade oil gets thicker as it gets hotter? That does not mean that.
No.
Why are you concerned about the oil acting like a thinner oil whenever it's cold weather outside?
Because it's, when it gets heated, it expands. When it's cold outside, it's hard to heat. So
It really doesn't expand that much. Transmission fluid expands a lot, water expands a lot, oil doesn't expand that much. But you're having, if you've got really, really thick oil in your crankcase, it's gonna work the crud out of the starter, having to churn through that molasses, you know? So you basically want it to have a multi-viscosity where it'll act more like a thinner oil when it's cold and act more like a thicker oil when it's hot, so that it can do, it's the best of both worlds is what they're trying to shoot for. Okay, one more thing. Let's go to this engine repair test key from the black gold handout. This is actually from an article that I wrote, feature article I wrote on engine oil and oil stuff and you know, oil pumps and stuff. No, there's not. There, I'm giving you, I'm handing this out verbally. Okay, we're gonna whip through this pretty quick. It won't take long. What's the only component in the engine that receives unfiltered oil?
The oil pan.
Well, she got the first part of the answer right. The oil pump. The oil pump technically receives unfiltered oil. All right. Do you see those? You see every one of those items up there on that top shelf? Everything you see on that top shelf is an oil pump. Some oil pumps are turned by the camshaft via the distributor gear. Some are turned by the crankshaft on the nose of 2 flats. The one on the Toyota Camry that's standing up in the back is turned by the timing belt. And that would,
You said top shelf. I was looking at the very top. I was like, that steering wheel doesn't
no,
look
right
like-
over there on the, not the very top shelf, I'm sorry. The top shelf in the left side of that not on the top of the shelf, the top shelf, basically. So look at all of those are oil pumps up there. What's the best way to measure bearing clearances when building an engine?
What's the name of that tool that's just a thin piece of metal that flicks
Feeler
out?
gauges? Feeler gauges?
No, plastic gauge. Plastic gauge is this waxy string that's made to exact specifications. When you put it in there and tighten your bearings down, it squishes it out. And whenever you take it back apart,
Plastic or plastic?
plastic gauge. That's actually a brand name. It's a registered trademark. PLSTIGAUGE.
When you put a circle with an R?
Yeah, you do, or you'll get it wrong. So anyway, so here's the when you're building one, the absolute, you can measure it with a mic, you can mic this, you can mic that and all that, but the only way you're really gonna know what that clearance is to put some plastic gauge, lay it on the crankshaft, tighten those bearings down, pull them back apart, and see how much it squishes that out. If it squishes it out, there's a little, and I should have some in my hand to show you because I got some. They don't cost much. You can buy it for a couple of bucks. It's a string about that long. It's in a little sleeve, and on the side of the sleeve you got the little gauge where you can see how far it's squished out. And you don't need to have over about 1.5 thousandths clearance, or you're going to have bearing noise and lose oil pressure and stuff like that. See, I put a crankshaft kit one time in a Chevy Cavalier, and I never could understand why when I was working at the Ford place I kept getting thrown Chevys and Cadillacs and all that kind of junk. But anyway, I put a crankshaft kit in it with the engine in the car. I actually pull the transmission, and I pull the flywheel off, and I pull the crankshaft out when the engine's still in the car, and I put the crankshaft back in it. And it was a crank kit. The bearings come with a crank kit. Put it all back together, torqued everything down, cranked it up. I didn't plastic gauge it because typically you're putting a crank kit in there, you don't think you need to. The bearings and the crank are supposed to be matched. When we put it in there, you crank it up, you can hear main bearing rumble. So I pulled it back down, plastic gauge it, had too much clearance. I had about 2 thousandths of clearance on the mains. And so I said, well, what are we going to do about that? So we sent it to the machine shop that sent it to us, and they machined it 9 thousandths and gave us a set of 20 thousandths undersized bearings, and it still had too much clearance. And so I told the shop foreman, I said, what are we going to do about this? And so he said, well, let's just file the caps a little bit, and that's going to tighten it up some. And we did that, and then it drove out of there quiet. So anyway, it's a bunch of issues you get into with something like that, and they're like, who pays the bill on that, What prevents, wait a minute, why do engines with overhead camshafts have pressurized oil leak points cam and block engines don't have? Why did I talk about that Dodge? It's leaking oil from under the cylinder head because there has to be a pressurized oil feed through the cylinder head gasket up into the head to lubricate the camshaft. So if you've got overhead cam, you're going to have a leak point, a possible leak point that you won't have in an engine like the old 350 that's just splashing oil up in there and just squirted up through the push rod zone. Got it? And so, and that incidentally, I think that Dodge engine job is going to start next week.
Is it?
I believe so. So you and Lundy are going to have your work cut out for you. What prevents damage from occurring if the oil filter becomes completely clogged? So start with me. Look over there. See all them oil filters that are cut apart? All those different brand of oil filters? All right, in the bottom of that oil filter, underneath the element, there's a spring-loaded valve that seats against the center of that thing. When the oil filter stops completely up, it can push that spring and let oil go past that element. It's better to have dirty oil lubricating your engine than no oil. So you don't want the oil filter to stop up and destroy the engine, right? Crankshaft bearings shouldn't have more than 1.5 thousandths clearance. You come here. What? What was that? Oh, okay. Okay, I'll see you. See you.
Bye, guys. Carol.
I understand what she was saying. The oil pump is always driven by the camshaft. True or false?
Wait a second. Come back.
Oh, crankshaft bearing shouldn't have more than 1.5 thousandths clearance. That's that was the answer. That's 0.0015 is how you write that. The oil pump is always driven by the camshaft. True or false?
False.
False.
Because I just told you some of those are driven by the crank and everything up there. What happens if the oil pressure relief valve sticks open?
Just dirty oil.
And get too pressurized.
You don't have any oil pressure and you destroy the engine. So, listen to this, guys. Pay attention to what I'm getting ready to tell you, because this is really important. If you see an engine that has starved for oil and has destroyed itself, the first thing you need to look at, you need to find out where the relief valve is, and you need to see if it's stuck open. Because if it is, I have seen, open, yeah. If it's stuck open, see, the oil pushes that relief valve against its spring, and it moves that relief valve to a point to where there's an exhaust, and if that spring is broken, or that relief valve gets fouled somehow that it's where it's stuck open, then the relief valve is the only thing that gives you oil pressure. The oil pump is positive displacement, but if it's not pushing against that spring, you don't have pressure. The relief valve is what gives you oil pressure. And the pump actually moves oil, but it doesn't produce pressure unless it's got a restriction of some kind. And that's what that oil pressure relief valve does. One time I did an engine in a 10.5 Lodestar 1600 International truck. It was like a 345 or whatever, which is, International had peculiar, they had 304s and 345s and all that kind of junk. And so when I got through building that engine, I put everything all like it was supposed to be. But one of the things that the boss man didn't sell them was an oil pump. Everything plastic gauged out real good, cranked it up, and the oil pressure was lower than it should have been. He didn't want to ante up and give them an oil pump, and they weren't going to buy anything else. And so what I did was I took the relief valve out. I noticed that spring wasn't quite tight enough to, to create the kind of pressure it needed. And so I took that spring out, and I put some washers under it to give it more tension, and the oil pressure was really good after that. But see, if the oil pressure can also be lost because of bearings that are worn out and it's going out. So if you got one that you think the bearings are worn out to the point, like they usually be the cam bearing first, pull the oil pump off, get a rubber tip blower, pressure up the oil gallery, and see if you hear air hissing out somewhere inside the engine block. Wherever you see it hissing at, where you need to put bearings to stop that oil pressure from getting lost. That's really not complicated if you think about it the right way. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can do with pressure. Let's see. One more thing. What's one thing that can cause just about any engine to develop oil sludge?
Sitting on.
No.
Not changing, right?
Well, that's part of it, but short drives without letting the engine warm up, or an inoperative or poorly designed PCV system. Toyota replaced a bunch of engines in some of their cars around 2000 model year because the PCV system didn't work right, and it sludged the engines up so bad that it was cheaper to go ahead and put another engine in it than it was to desludge the engine. A lot of times, if you get a sludge is thick enough in an engine, you're better off just to put another motor in it than you are to try to desludge it. Because it's messy, it takes time, and when you get through putting all of the parts in it that you have to rebuild it and everything, you've spent more money than you would have putting an engine in it anyway. Especially if you're getting used, good used salvage yard engines. In addition to lubricating the engine, what other functions does the oil perform? It cools engine parts, and here's another one: suspends contaminants. Do you like to have contaminants suspended in your engine oil? Frequent oil changes will guarantee that an engine will last.
False.
That's false. Other things can destroy an engine besides oil. I will tell you this though, and this is a story I'm going to tell you, and then we're going to be through and we're going to go back to work. Knew a guy, drove a 74 Chevrolet pickup truck, and he had worked with the Parks and Recreation Department in Los Angeles, California, and decided to move back to Port Arthur, Texas. He didn't know anything about a car. He's working in a shop, and he said he bought the truck with 2,500 miles on it when it was nearly brand new. And he said, I've been driving it for years, and last week the timing chain broke. Bent every valve in it, and I had the heads reworked and all that stuff. I said, really? The timing chain broke? I've never heard of a timing chain broke on a 350 Chevy. That's what's the craziest thing I ever heard. I said, how many miles does that truck have on it? He said, well, I don't know. The speedometer quit at 385,000. I said, seriously? And I kept talking to him, and it came to the point to where I realized that he didn't know how long oil changes were supposed to be. So he had changed his oil every 1,500 miles ever since he had the truck. And that engine always had pretty clean oil in it. Now, I'll tell you something else. You can drive an engine real gentle, like you're afraid you're going to tear it up, and you'll be surprised how clean that oil will stay. But if you get on it every time you take off, it causes all kinds of problems. Hey, there, right, Joe? Joe, have you tore up a few?
Only one.
Only one, okay.
Only one.
All right, then. It's not good, is it? They get you in trouble with your dad?
No, it was my car. They made him mad that blew it up.
Oh, that was that one, that, Talon, I mean, what was it? Was that it?
Phillips.
Huh?
Same thing.
Different one? You think it's time for an oil change on which truck? Your Power Stroke diesel? That's it, that's, lots of oil, isn't it? Lots of oil, lots of money. All right.
Well, I can't drive it right now.
Well, let's leave it sitting until you can drive it, that's how you do that. All right, anybody got any questions or comments? Huh?
Oh, yeah, my brakes didn't mess up.
Your brakes done with that? You need to take care of that.
I know.
You've been took brakes, you can fix it. You can take it, just jack it up, take the wheel off, see what's wrong with it. That'll be all right. You can do it.
Like all of them.
Huh?
Like every time I stop, it just squeaking over.
Oh, don't worry about it squeaking. Just drive that thing. It'll be all right. Yeah, squeaking ain't a big deal.
Sound like a buzz when I get ready to stop.